Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Here we are with another English 375 lecture for you today. Today is actually going to be, gasp, I know you're all can't believe it, our last sort of contentful lecture. It's the last piece of new material that we're going to go over. On Wednesday, we have one more sort of video recorded, not sort of, one more video recorded lecture that we'll be doing on Wednesday, and I'm going to do something a little bit different for that class. I'm going to do a last tips before your final. So it'll feed into our review session, which will then be in our in-person class on Thursday. And I'll go over things like, okay, to be blunt, I'm going to go over things that I think you'll mess up in class. And I'm going to try and at the last minute, put it in your minds to not, in fact, make these mistakes that are common and easy to make. It won't just be the stuff that we've been doing with WH words, etc. We'll go back all the way to things like constituency tests and what to avoid when you're doing those, etc., etc. Remembering things like binding, remembering things like complements versus adjuncts, remembering things like theta grids, although we're going to be talking about that a bunch today as well. So that's Wednesday's class. Today's class, like I said, we're going to do some new material. We're going to push forward, brave soldiers. And we're going to look at some new sentence types that we haven't covered. I teased them in one of your homeworks. I think it was probably homework 6 with a sentence like, Stephanie wants to leave for your challenge problem set. And we didn't actually have a very satisfying solution of how to deal with sentences like that. And today you're going to get one. It may be a bit of a longer lecture. We'll see. I hope not. But I'm going to try and get through everything that I need to. And without further ado, let's dive in. So today's topic is raising versus control. These are two different types of sentences. We haven't yet seen control types, so it's going to introduce this new type. We've already seen raising sentences, raising constructions, right? And we've seen them here, like sentence 1, Janice is likely to like books. Ooh, maybe I shouldn't have made it likely to like. Too late, I already put it in there. Janice is likely to like books. You guys are smart, you'll figure it out. So we've already seen these types of constructions, and we've already noticed some of their peculiarities, right? They have actually several layers of peculiarities. The first one that we noted had to do with theta grids, had to do with the theta grids for these two predicates, right? So we have two predicates here. I go to my side view. We have two predicates here. We have this, they hath been erased. Or, alternatively, I forgot to write them. It could have been either. But we're going to blame it on they were erased, and I'm going to rewrite them here. So our first predicate is this is likely, and we'll see that is likely takes a prepositional CP, right? And what's the prepositional CP here? Well, to like books, but more specifically, Janice to like books. That this only takes a proposition CP. It doesn't take that external theta role, the subject, right? It doesn't take like an agent in the subject position. Unlike its unfortunately similar counterpart, like over here, which takes an agent. Somebody likes something. Somebody likes something. I like pie. Janice likes books, etc. And so we see that we have 3 theta roles. I'm going to erase this for now. 3 theta roles to assign. 3 theta roles to assign. And we want to know who's assigning to what, right? Who is assigning these theta roles to what? So we kind of take this from a semantics approach and we try and unpack what's going on in this sentence. So who's the agent? Who's doing the liking? Well, we'll start off. What's being liked? This is even easier. We'll go kind of right to left here. What is being liked? Well, it's books. It's obviously this DP books. So our DP books is the theme. It's appearing right next to like, so that's fine. In the same clause as the thing that's assigning its theta role, so we're happy about it. Who's doing the liking? Who likes books in this scenario? Who likes books? Janice likes books. Janice. Janice is the agent of the liking here. Janus is the agent of the liking. Okay, this one's problematic. We're going to have to figure this out in the tree structure later on. I know this is review. We've already figured this out, but we're doing a little review because we're going to highlight the differences between this and something else. So Janus, to remind ourselves, is the agent. It's weird because it's not in the clause that it receives its theta role from. It's receiving a theta role from like, but it's all the way up here in the is likely clause. So that's weird, but we'll figure that out. And lastly, and kind of importantly, we see that is likely doesn't have an agent. It only takes this proposition, Janus to like books. Janus to like books. Luckily, we have a pretty good solution for this. In our trees, we can I'll try and scooch forward so you can see a little better. So this is what the tree for this looks like. I did played a little fast and loose here with features and case and things like that. We'll fill that in as we go. So we have our higher clause predicate here is likely, that takes a propositional CP, Janus to like books. And so we see here we have our nice theta, our D structure in which theta roles are assigned. Like is assigning a theta role to books here, its theme, and is also assigning a theta role to Janus, its agent up here. And is likely is assigning this a propositional theta role to this CP right here, also in good proximity. Then, after we've assigned those theta roles, Janus has to move out. Why does Janus have to move out? Two reasons. Two reasons why Janus has to move out. One reason is to satisfy the EPP of this higher clause. There's nothing in the subject position that ain't cool, so we have to do that. We have to. The other reason is that it can't receive case here from this non-finite lower clause, this non-finite embedded clause. It needs case, and it can't get it from this non-finite clause. So it pieces out up to here where it can actually get case as well. And in this, we see a really nice symmetry. This lower clause has a theta role to assign, doesn't have case to assign. Check on the theta role minus on the case. And this higher clause is the dead opposite. It has no theta role. It only has a theta role for proposition. It has no theta role for Janus, but it does have case. So there's a really nice symmetry here where Janus can receive a theta role down here without receiving case, and then move up here to receive case without receiving another theta role, which would break the theta criterion. So your quick review of raising structures. Now, let us look at some weird sentences. They're not actually that weird, they won't sound that weird to you, but they're structurally odd, as we noticed with our homework last time. So now let's think about this sentence. Janus is reluctant to like books. Janus is reluctant to like books. Note how similar it seems to this sentence up here. Janus is likely to like books, Janus is reluctant to like books. We would assume, based on the superficial similarities here between is likely and is reluctant, that they are structurally identical, that I could just like erase likely and write reluctant and that it would pan out, but it won't actually. They look like they should be similar, but they're really not. They're really not. And we can get to this, the underlying differences, we can get deeper than that surface similarity by looking at the theta grids. So let's look at the theta grids. First we note that the theta grid for like, which I put over here, for like, okay, I'll do my side view again. For like is identical. Like still takes an agent, it still takes a theme. Fine, it's fine. But when we look at is reluctant and the theta grid for this, we note a very stark difference, and this is what we want to capitalize on. Reluctant, it still takes a proposition, just like is likely did. It still takes a proposition CP, in this case to like books, or Janus to like books, but it also takes an agent. Unlike is likely, is reluctant takes an agent or gives an agent theta role to something. It has that slot to give. Who's it giving it to? Now we'll try and break this down again, just like we did up here, and say who's going in each of these slots. Up here it worked really nicely. We had the proposition and we had the CP proposition, and we have two DPs in our sentence to fit these nicely. So we have 3 slots up here, and we have 3 things to slot in. Down here is not going to be so nice. What's the theme? What's being liked? Books. Still books. Who's the agent? Who's liking books? Still Janice. So far, so good. Still Janice, the DP. What is Janice reluctant about? Janice liking books. So we have a proposition, this to like books thing, or this Janice to like books thing. Who is reluctant? Who is reluctant? Janice. Janice is reluctant. Why am I being weird about this? Well, I'm weird. That's just inescapable truth. But the reason I'm being weird about that in this particular instance is that there's a problem whereby Janice is the agent of is reluctant. She is the one who's reluctant. Janice is reluctant. She's also the one who likes books. So this singular DP, Janice, wants to be both the agent of reluctant and the agent of to like books. And that, my friends, my class, is a violation of the theta criterion, because the theta criterion says each DP receives exactly 1 theta role, and each theta role is assigned to exactly 1 DP. Not DP, argument, excuse me. I was thinking of case. Theta criterion has to do with arguments instead, which is why propositions receive them, right? So the theta criterion says that each argument receives a theta role, and each theta role is assigned to exactly 1 argument. So here, our argument Janice seems to be assigned 2 theta roles. And what we'll notice here is sort of intuitively or semantically the difference between Janice is reluctant to like books. Janice is reluctant. Janice is in fact reluctant. She is the one that's reluctant. Where Janice is likely to like books, Janice isn't likely. There's nothing about Janice that's that is likely. What is likely is Janice to like books. But down here, that's not the case. There is something about Janice that's reluctant. Janice is in fact reluctant. So that's a difference there between these raising structures and this, which we're going to call a control structure. So how do we solve this problem? Again, to quickly reiterate the problem that we have is that we've got too many theta roles. We have 4 theta roles being assigned, and we only have 3 things: Janice, books, and this proposition. So we've just got, in some ways, either too many theta roles or not enough arguments, right? That's the issue. And so which part of that are we going to want to fix? Too many theta roles or not enough arguments? Well, to be honest, there's nothing you can really do about too many theta roles. That's just the way that these predicates work. I mean, as far as we know, at least. We can make up the system however we want, as we'll see in just a second. Some of you might not like that, but it's going to be easier for us to add an argument. Say there's an extra argument here, as opposed to taking away a theta role. Where do we want to say this extra argument is? Well, we kind of already know. Books is in the right spot. Janice is in a place to receive a theta role from is reluctant. The proposition is in the correct place to receive a theta role from is reluctant. The only weirdness is in this subject position of the embedded clause. The subject position of the embedded clause is the part that's missing something. And it's the very self-same part where we moved Janice out earlier, right? So this position is the weird one. I'm going to rewrite this sentence really quickly to make it match is reluctant. So the 2 things I'm going to be doing is I'm going to take away this movement for now, and I'm going to change likely to reluctant. That's literally it. But I'm going to do it nonetheless. Oops. I told you what I was going to do, and then I didn't do it. Typical. I'm going get out. I'm gonna use some color here. Whoa, don't mind my head being really close to the screen. So what I did, again, is I changed likely to reluctant so that we could have is reluctant. And I undid the movement. Before we moved something from this position to this position, we moved Janus out. Why did I undo that movement? Well, before we wanted to say that Janus wasn't generated here, and we saw that because it wasn't receiving a theta roll from is likely. But here, Janus is base generated there at the D structure. We already have Janus up here. How do we know we have Janus there at D structure? We know that because we can see that it's receiving a theta roll from is reluctant, and theta roll assignment happens at D structure. So we know that we don't need to move Janus up here because Janus is already there receiving a theta roll. So the question becomes, what the heck, red box? We know we kind of want Janus to be here as well, right? Because Janus is reluctant and Janus likes books. So we kind of want Janus here, but we don't see it in our evidence. The proof is in the pudding, there's nothing there. So we're forced into an awkward spot, class, a really awkward spot. We know we want an argument here so that it can absorb the agent theta roll from like to like. But we don't see one. We don't see one. What happens when we know there has to be something there, but we can't find it? Well, we get a little bit creative, a little bit saucy as far as syntacticians can get saucy, which isn't particularly far. And what we say is that there is something there. There must be something there. We know that there must be something there. But you can't hear it. You can't hear it. There must be something null there. Similar-ish, you can think how we said like there's traces in certain places that can fill spots, etc. Now we're going to say there's something else invisible here. Invisible here. That's absorbing its theta roll. And what we're going to call this thing is big pro. This is fantastic A+ syntax naming going on here in the syntax community. So it's big pro. And you write it like this. In all caps because, it's silent, so we need to make sure that we can't miss it otherwise, apparently. Big, all capital pro. And what that stands for roughly is a weird pronoun. It's a null pronoun, essentially. Why pronoun? Well, we want it to be sort of co-indexed with Janus. Because what this is saying is, Janus is reluctant, Janus, to like books. And so this big pro is that null, that whispered Janus. Janus is reluctant because she is. She's reluctant. What is she reluctant? Janus, for herself, to like books. So this big pro goes in there, and it takes the theta roll from to like, that agent one. It's what goes here. So Janus, the overt Janus goes here. Janus is reluctant. We can see it there. The proposition is this to like books. The theme is books. And now we have something to put in this box, this theta roll box, which is this big pro. Big pro. Who would have known? Who would have known? And so what we see is that in this sentence, in our raising structure, Janus is likely to like books. Janus starts down low here and moves out of there to the higher clause. There's movement of that DP from the lower clause to the higher clause. In this one, Janus is reluctant to like books, which again looks extremely similar. There's no movement. I mean, there's movement of the tense, etc. But there's no movement of the DP from the lower clause to the higher clause. There's just two DPs. There's this higher DP Janus, and there's this lower DP pro. Pro, by the way, is a DP. It's a DP argument. It's a DP argument there. How are we doing? We're doing okay. So this one has that raising movement. That's why we call it raising. And this one doesn't. It's got control. We're going to say that Janice is controlling the pro, big pro. Janice controls the big pro. Why can't we just put Janice here? Like reiterate? Or put a real pronoun there? Can we just put a real pronoun there? It's weird, right? Janice is reluctant. She to like books. Herself to like books. Right? I tried the pronoun and I tried the anaphor and nothing works there. Why does nothing work there? Pause the video even if you want to think about this. We have a very good reason. There's something else weird. So pro is weird on two accounts. There's two ways that pro is weird. One way that pro is weird is that it's not pronounced. You actually can't hear it, right? When you say that sentence, you don't say Janice or you don't say pro. You can say that to yourself if you want, but you don't say that in an interview, please. So that's one way that pro is weird. What's the second way that pro is weird? What's the second way that pro is weird? If we are completionists, or if we're taking the big picture here, we'll notice something else odd about pro. Why in this sentence, I'm getting there. This is relevant. I'm not just changing topics. We're going to talk. The second reason pro is weird has to do with case. Why is Janice move up in this scenario? Well, one reason we said it moved up in the raising structure is to satisfy the EBP, like to fill that subject position. But the other reason Janice moves is because it can't receive case here, because this is a non-finite clause, a non-finite embedded clause in this case. That's still true in this control sentence. This is still a non-finite clause and thus still cannot assign case to pro. Pro is not in a case receiving position here, yet it's grammatical. So we have two weird elements of pro, of big pro. There is such thing as a little pro, by the way, but we probably won't get into that. All right. The two weird things about big pro. One is that it's silent, and two is that it doesn't need case. It doesn't need case. Those are the things you need to know about big pro. And there are people, this is weird. This is understandably weird. If you think this is weird, you're right. There are some hypotheses, including from Chomsky, Noam Chomsky himself, that suspects that these two features of pro are connected. That there's something about it not being pronounced that like absolves it from the case filter. Whether you want to buy that as an explanation or not is totally up to you. It's totally up to you. I don't mind either way. What we're doing now is we are fitting data to our observations of these sentences, that they have different theta grids and require different pieces. Is this a super elegant solution? Is this like, aha, this makes perfect sense and is just what I would have guessed, and I'm really happy about having these random null pronouns that don't take case that I posit have to be there. No, nobody's happy about this situation in English syntax. This is a clunky, ugly piece of machinery that we need in our system to get it to work, right? It's a technicality. And we've added this weird piece that is unlike anything we've seen before to fit this weird situation. So if you're skeptical of this, if you're unhappy with this solution, you have some very good right to be. This is, again, this is a Band-Aid, if you want to think about it that way, because we need to stop the bleeding of sentences like this. Nobody thinks this is an ideal case, and perhaps 20 years from now, when you're teaching this class, you'll be teaching this differently because somebody will have made a major breakthrough and figure out what Big Pro is really doing there. But until then, this is kind of the simplest solution that we have that meets, that accounts for our observations. It's the simplest solution we have that accounts for its observations. So that's big pro in control scenarios, but there's more than one. Okay, so that's part one of our lecture. Part one of our lecture is the difference here between raising sentences and control sentences. How do you know the difference? Because these look very similar, right? Remember, Janice is likely to like books. Janice is reluctant to like books. What if we had something like Janice wants to like books? Janice wants to like books. Is that a raising structure or a control structure? Because you're going to need to know that if I ask you to draw a tree for this, which is something I may ask you to do in your final. There won't be tons of questions about this because you haven't had a chance to practice it on your homeworks, but I reserve the right to ask you that. Janice wants to like books. How can we tell the difference? Well, again, you can go to theta grids. Theta grids are your friend here. Or you can you can use the theta grids as they exist in your mind, right? Like up here we said Janice is likely. Well, there's nothing that's likely about Janice. The fact that there's nothing likely about Janice means that it's moved there, that it wasn't originally there, that is likely isn't assigning it a theta role. So the fact that there's nothing likely about Janice, Janice isn't likely, Janice isn't doing a likely, whatever, suggests to us that it's raised to that position, that it's a raising structure. As opposed to Janice is reluctant to like books. Janice is in fact reluctant. Yeah, Janice is reluctant. So we can use that difference to sort of tease apart these raising versus control sentences. So if we had an imaginary sentence here, Janice wants to like books, we want to ask ourselves, is Janice doing the wanting? Is Janice doing the wanting in this scenario? And the answer is yeah, Janice is doing the wanting. Janice, just like is reluctant, Janice is doing the wanting, and Janice is doing the liking of books. And that double role that she plays, that a DP can play as both agent of the higher clause and of the lower clause, is your signal that it's a control sentence. And you're going to use a big pro there. Big pro. Cool. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully this makes sense. I have a little bit of time. I got 20 minutes here, so I'm going to make it harder. There's more types. So we've distinguished now between raising and control. But there are subcategories here. There's actually two types of raising, and there's two types of control. Two types of raising and two types of control. Two types of raising, two types of control. We've seen one. So we've seen, and it has to do with whether they're subjects or objects, right? So we've done some of these operations on subjects so far. In these scenarios, we've been looking largely at subjects. So in the raising, we raised the subject of liking to the subject position of is likely. That's called subject to subject raising. Subject to subject raising. Subject, spec TP, to subject, spec TP raising. That's what that type of raising is called. And down here, we saw that it was the subject, Janice, that's doing the controlling of this pronoun. Janice was a subject and it was controlling. So this is subject to subject raising, and this is subject control. Let's get some objects in here. Why don't we? Let us get some objects. Let's start out with object control. We're going to start out with object control. And to get object control, we're going to, these are typically, which one you get was subject control, object control, subject to subject raising. All these different types of sentences are largely controlled by the predicates that you use, the verbs or the adjectival predicates, either one. So for object control, we're going to have a sentence like this. And we're going to use the verb persuaded. This is the second half of the lecture. again. So if this first part is making good sense, good, good. If that made sense, good. Like I said, this is going to get a little bit more complicated. We're fitting a lot of material here in the end. So we're going to look at a new sentence type. And we're gonna break this down just like we did with the other ones by looking at theta grids, etc. So now we have this sentence. Janice persuaded Ross to like books. So before we had Janice is reluctant to like books. Now we have Janice persuaded Ross to like books. I'll put the brackets in there to show you the embedded clause. Janice persuaded Ross to like books. Okay, so this is weird. Let's look at the theta. Let's delve into why this is weird. This is why is this weird? On the surface, it looks like this is a clean solution to this kind of problem, right? Because this one we said we have 4 theta roles and we only had 3 things. Well, here we added a new thing. Ross, in a lot of ways, should be appearing in this pro position, which should make the theta grid work out more nicely. But let's see if that's actually true. So like we already know, I'll repeat it just, for good measure. Like takes its agent and takes its theme. What's the agent of like here? Who's doing the liking in this scenario? Me, it's Ross. Ross is doing the liking. This is for liking. Ross is doing the liking. What does Ross like? It's true, he does. Books. Ross likes books. Ross to like books. So that's fine. Boom. Same as it ever was, right? Likes. What about persuaded? What about persuaded? Now, persuaded is a really weird type of predicate. Let's do it one by one. Does Janice get a theta role? Is Janice involved in the persuading? Yes. Janice is an agent of the persuading. So I'm gonna do this differently. I'm gonna do one theta role at a time. So I'm gonna say, okay, well, we know that persuade has at least one theta role, an agent one, and that's Janice. Janice is doing it. Janice, my sister-in-law, by the way, has persuaded me to like books. Anybody else? What else was persuaded do? Did Janice persuade somebody? Is there somebody that's the sort of the recipient of the persuasion, the experiencer of Janice's persuasive powers? Yeah, me, Ross, right? Janice is persuading Ross. Ross plays a role there. It's the experiencer of the persuasion. Is there any other theta role? So I'll put letters for us here. This is J for Janice and R for Ross down here. R for Ross. This is B for books. Janice persuaded. Is there something else? What did Janice persuade Ross about? A proposition. Just like these ones had propositions. That's where we get the embedded clause. So Janice persuaded Ross to like books. Ross to like books is what she persuaded me on. Prepositions are hard there. So this takes a proposition, CP. This is the whole thing. Cool. So we see that likes still taking its 2 agent roles. Ross is the liker, books are the liked. But that persuading takes three different theta, or assigns 3 different theta roles. It assigns a persuader, an agent, that's Janice. Somebody persuades somebody else that experiences the persuasion, that's Ross. Or it could be like that theta role is a little bit weird, but there's certainly one there. And it also has a proposition, Ross to like books. I put the brackets here in this box to represent this whole clause because I didn't feel like using good indexes because I'm feeling lazy on a Monday. Ross to like books is the proposition. So that's cool. We have this all figured out. What's the problem? What's the problem here? It's similar to this problem. So I'm going to fill in the letters for this one so that we can see this. Filling in the letters was a good idea from the beginning that I wish I had been doing. Better late than never, I suppose. So for this one, for Janice is reluctant to like books, we saw that Janice was the agent of reluctant. The proposition was this whole thing, this bracketed thing. But Janice was also the agent of liking of books, and that books is fine down here. So the problem here was that Janice got two theta rules. Janice got two theta rules. And how did we solve that? Well, we solved that by saying, well, this one isn't a real Janice, it's a pro. This is big pro. This is where big pro goes. So down here, we have a similar problem, except not with Janice, not with the subject this time, but with the object. Here, the problem is that Ross is both being persuaded and he is the liker of books. So Ross gets two agent roles here. Ross gets two agent roles here. No. Misspeaking. Whew, I've been talking too long. Ross gets two theta roles. They're not both agent. In fact, just this one is agent. This one is more object, right? So, but nonetheless, Ross is getting two theta roles, which should be a violation of the theta criterion. How do we solve that? But we actually solve it the same way we solved this one. Hopefully there's a through line that you're beginning to see. When something has more than one theta role here, like this, like we put pro here, we're going to replace this one and put pro there. So this is the solution to that. It's also why we call it object control. Object control, because here Janice, the subject, is controlling the big pro, and in this sentence Ross, the object, is controlling the big pro. And by control we mean it's co-indexed, right? This is a big pronoun that is co-indexed with Ross. Here is a big pronoun that's co-indexed with the subject, Janice. Hopefully that makes sense on a somewhat of a theoretical, on a theta role, from a theta role standpoint. Hopefully that makes sense from a theta role standpoint. How we draw the tree for that is, it's tricky. It's tricky. Essentially what you need, how much time do I have? I have a little bit of time. I'll draw this tree for you as well. I'll attempt to draw this tree for you quickly. What you need, what's weird, is that, so we can look ahead to what I'm going to be drawing. Feel free to try this tree if you like. That Ross is going to be the complement of the persuading in this scenario. Ross is going to be the complement. It's going to be it's going to be a verbal complement there. Sister to the V head persuading. And this proposition is going to be an adjunct for now. Now this brings up its own problems, but like we don't have too much time to talk about this. So for now, just list this proposition as an adjunct of persuading. It gets us into that same sort of issue we get when we have ditransitive verbs. Essentially what we're going to say is that persuading is ditransitive there. It takes two objects. It takes Ross as its experiencer one, and it takes this proposition as another one. But we want to make sure that Ross is in that true complement position, so it is closer, essentially just to get our word order right. So go ahead, taking that advice, go ahead and try and draw this sentence, and I will do the same. I'm going to erase my whole sentence. For better or worse, I'm going to give myself some room. So this will take me a second. I encourage you to also take a second of your own time to try and draw the sentence. if we had more time, I'll see if I can chat, and if the semester was longer, if I had another 3 weeks, etc., we would talk more about ditransitive verbs, and we would crack that code a little bit. Makes me a little bit sad inside that we didn't make it there, but that's okay. We made a good effort. We made it pretty far here. We would complicate the VP in order to do that. We would actually split the VP into multiple phrases. Ooh. And then these multiple phrases would each have a complement. One would be the object of a intransitive, and the other one would be the complement of the ditransitive. So it would free us up to have two complement positions by splitting the VP into two parts. Don't worry about that, unless you want to. That is not for this class. Okay, Janice persuaded Ross to like books. It's actually not too bad. It's actually not too bad the way we have it here. So, right, what we have here is Janice. Again, this seems really hard, but if we break it down, it's not so bad. Janice is the subject of our higher clause. Janice is the one who did the persuading. So Janice persuaded who? Ross. Ross is the complement of persuaded. He's the one who got persuaded. And what did Janice persuade Ross? This whole CP, to like books, to like books. So the CP has itself to and t. Don't put that as a preposition, by the way. We want to be able to differentiate between to like, to verb, in this infinitival non-finite clause structure, from something like went to the store. To the store is not the same type of structure as to like. Maybe I'll talk about that on Wednesday and things to avoid, but make sure we're putting to and t here. Like books. And so what's interesting is that here we have our pro, just like we said we were gonna. Our pro is the agent of the lower embedded clause. Pro, which is really Ross, to like books. So again, we have Janice persuaded Ross to like books, with this big pro and Ross being co-indexed there. That's why it's object control, because the object of the higher clause is controlling, object control, the big pro in this non-finite embedded clause. Note that all these sentence types that we've looked at have non-finite embedded clauses. And once again, we see pro here being covert instead of overt. It's silent and not pronounced, and it's also not receiving case. It's receiving a theta role from like, it's the agent of like, but it's not receiving case because this is a non-finite clause, which once again is the same weirdness we saw with subject control, where big pro is silent and doesn't get case. Silent and doesn't get case. Whew. Okay, we did subject raising. We did subject control. That was this one. Is reluctant. Janice is reluctant. We did object control. Ross persuaded. Janice persuaded Ross to like books. Right, what looks weird here especially when we draw out like this is it looks like Ross is appearing as the subject of this non-finite clause, a position in which it doesn't get case. A position in which it doesn't get case. But this is actually not what this structure looks like, as we just saw in our tree. What this structure actually looks like, if I were to rewrite it, is like this. This sentence actually, from this standpoint, looks like this. Janice persuaded Ross, where we see Ross appearing now instead in a case receiving position as the complement of this transitive verb, or ditransitive verb. Janice persuaded Ross, pro to like books, where this is just that CP proposition. So this hopefully clarifies that. You guys got one more in you? I got 5 minutes. You guys got one more in you? I think you do. I think you do. I think you got one more in you. Let's do one more. We might go a little over our 50 minutes, but I've gone under our 50 minutes, so you guys owe me. You owe me some time. You don't really owe me anything. Okay, so for this one, we want the sentence. How do I want this sentence? Oh, yeah. Sorry that took me a little second, but better to have thought about it and remembered what I wanted to say here than to tell you something incorrect. We'll go with this. Cool. I got it. I got it. We figured it out. This is a weird sentence. This, I think, is almost the weirdest of the bunch, which I've left myself now 2 minutes to talk about it because I debated. Oh no. Okay, it's a challenge to you, and I'll talk about it very briefly when we pick up class on Wednesday. I don't want to like make this an hour and a half video or anything. So the sentence that we're going to look at when we pick back up on Wednesday is this. Janice wants Ross to leave. So this is a new challenge. Wants is a weird verb. So I said before that most of these sentence types that we're doing, object control, subject control, raising, are themselves determined by what predicate you use. But some predicates are strange and they can take multiple types of sentences, multiple types of embedded clause structures like that. In a similar way to verbs in English can also often either be intransitive or I ate or I ate supper, right? I ate is intransitive and I ate supper is a transitive verb. The verbs can be weird here as well. So wants is something that can take multiple types of these things. Wants can also be a subject control, I think, right? Subject control. Yeah, it could be subject control, but here it's not subject control. Here it's not subject control. Here it's instead something else. So what your job is, if you want, if you choose, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to try and diagram this sentence. Where I would start is by doing the theta grid for this. What does to leave take? Well, that's fairly obvious, hopefully. What does wants take? That's less obvious. So start with the theta grids. Janice wants Ross to leave. Again, there's a problem here of it looks like Ross to leave, that Ross is appearing in a position that shouldn't receive case. We have a solution for that using the pieces that we've seen in today's class. Let's see if we can leverage them and put these together to get our last type of embedded, non-finite embedded clause called object raising, subject to object raising. Subject to object raising. The last one we haven't talked about. Okay, class, listen. Real talk. You ready for real talk? That was a lot of material. I covered a lot of stuff. And like I said, I would have loved to have taken 2 full class periods to talk about this, these control and different raising scenarios. Luckily, we did raising earlier, so we had a bit of a leg up, but it would have been nice to get questions and to walk you through it. This is something I would have liked to have talked about in person because it is a little bit more complex. So feel free to ask me lots of questions, shoot me emails, rewatch parts of this if you want. Do what you need to do, I suppose. But if you're feeling like this is a lot to pile on, also don't panic about this with regards to the final exam. Chances are I will put a two things. Chances are I will put a question about control somewhere on the exam. Chances are I won't put more than one question about that on the exam. Chances are it won't be worth 50% of your final grade. So make effort to learn what I was talking about in this class, but don't panic about it. And if it's not making any sense, just let me know, and I'm happy to walk you through it. So I'm already over time, like I said, so I'm gonna cut it off here. We have one more class together, one more video like this, and one more synchronous class. So we're wrapping it on up here in English 375. I hope you have a fantastic day as hopefully the weather starts to warm up a little bit for us. I'll catch you guys later. Have a good one. Have dreams of object control sentences or something. And I'll talk to you on Wednesday again.